Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be checking out a video that has been requested many times in the comments section, and that is British numbers confuse Americans. I'm not really sure what they're getting at here. Like, what are the differences between American numbers and British numbers? Beyond the fact that in America, we still use the imperial system, and in the UK, they use a hybrid system of metric and imperial.
Oh, I didn't know it was hybrid.
Yeah, you really haven't looked into the measurement system or anything to do with numbers, really, from the UK so far.
Yeah, I can't imagine what would be that different.
Right.
Other than, like, the measurements.
Right, that is literally the only thing I can imagine, but I don't think that's what they're getting at here. I think this would say something about measurements or the metric system or something like that. So I think it's going to be more in depth about the way we use numbers in general. So anyways, guys, enough rambling. Let's go ahead and jump in here and check out British numbers confuse Americans.
I am from upstate New York.
I'm from downstate New York.
I live now in Brighton, England.
And I live in London now.
So how long have you been in the UK?
13 years.
So I've been living here for 10 years, and I've spent a lot of that time working as a physics teacher in secondary schools.
Well, they struggle with numbers.
So if you're giving somebody your phone number, your credit card number, and you've got two numbers in a row that are the same. So my number is 8844 in my office. The British way to say that would be 8844. And
That.
I don't know about Americans in general, but I can say that for me, when I moved to London, I was really thrown by the double numbers thing for quite a while.
I would say 8844.
I like that, though, because...
8844.
Because, like, I've worked in, like, phone call centers where people give you their credit card number and things. So it can be kind of confusing if someone repeats a number, whether, like, especially if they pause between, whether they're really meaning two eights or two fours, or were they just, like... So, yeah, I could see how that would be.
That's actually a really good way to say that.
Smart.
I had never thought of it.
8844.
Like that.
I like it.
I don't know if I've ever actually used that or not. Maybe I have. Maybe I haven't.
Do you guys do, like, 888? Like, if there's three?
Oh, yeah. That's a good way to say it, especially when you get to, like, instead of saying 888, it said 888.
Yeah.
It's a lot smoother, and you can understand.
You know that someone's not mistakenly repeating a number.
And I think specifically when you've got maybe an accent, like, for example, like you got a strong Southern accent here in America, and they 888, and it's like on the other end.
Sounds like they're glitching.
Yeah. But instead you would say 888 maybe.
Yeah.
That's really good. I like that. I actually might use that.
Yeah. I don't know if you do the 888, but I bet you do.
If they do 88,
Yeah.
I'm guessing they would do 888 probably too. Which
it makes sense. 007.
007.
James Bond 007.
007.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
I'd say 8844, but I wouldn't say 8844.
When I
That's
moved
true,
here, there were
88,
two problems.
44.
One is
Yeah.
the double numbers thing. And the second thing is that people say the telephone numbers in a different pattern than they do US numbers. So it was that different pattern plus people saying things like 55, 99. I had such a hard time getting those numbers. And maybe I'm just particularly slow.
But the thing that always trips me up is I don't know whether to say triple when I get three of those things in a row. So if I had a credit card that had 3 zeros in a row, do I say 000?
That makes sense to me now.
000? Do I say 000?
000, I would
say
think.
000.
I don't know what to say. I'd love to hear from British people and some instruction on how to read my credit card number.
Off the top of my head, I can't think of having ever heard triple, but I wouldn't rule it out. I don't actually know. Perhaps your commenters can let us know if they say triple.
Another example is what happens when you use numbers in the thousands or numbers with 4 digits. The president's address, that's called 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in American. And I think most British people would be comfortable with that being 1600. But when you get to a bigger number, Americans are happy to say that as 5300. The British
I would say 5300.
Yeah.
person would probably call this 5,300.
Oh.
Where I grew up on downstate
Why?
New York, pretty much everybody around me would say 5,300. Like, for example, I know that my parents will say 5,300.
Yeah.
But for me as a kid, I always found that a confusing way to phrase that There's something about it that just doesn't gel in my mind. And honestly, it took me years and years to really get that. And so in my mind, when I hear someone say something like 7,200, I have to kind of think about it in terms of $100 bills. So again, if someone says like 5,300, I have to visualize 53 $100 bills on a table. For me,
Interesting.
I've
never had a problem with that.
Me either. I've never had a problem with that.
I can see, though, as a kid, how it would be confusing. And I feel like I had started to see that a little bit with Sophia when I first started introducing her to the bigger numbers. But she caught on really quickly, and it wasn't ever a problem for her. But I could see, if you think about it, how it could be confusing. But
for me, I don't picture currency. I picture 2 zeros after whatever number. That's just what, like 5,200 is 52 and 2 zeros.
I just have never really thought about it.
52,000 would be 52 and 3 zeros.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, guys, like you would, in this scenario, would all of you actually, instead of saying 5,200, you would say 5,200? You know, it's interesting because the first thing they were talking about with the double zeros actually shortened what was said, but
like
this actually, but this lengthens it.
Yeah, makes
in
it
a way
more complicated to say.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It is interesting.
Me, I always consciously made an effort to say 5,300 instead of 5,300.
I'm just lazy.
More elegant,
shorten it.
300 or 5,300?
Well, 5,300 is easier to understand. I mean, when I say 5,300, I get confused myself whether I mean 5,300 or 53,000.
Even though I think that
I've never been confused.
I've never been confused by that.
Nicer, right? It sort of rolls off the tongue more easily. But I like the precision in saying 5,300.
Now, I do want to say real quick that there is a difference here. I was coming from the place of an address. But if we were talking about like a number, like in I don't know, there's an amount of something.
Yeah, it depends on the setting, like how exact we're trying to be.
Well, see, like the thing is, if there is like 5,300 marbles on a table, I probably would go 5,300 marbles on the table.
So there's no confusion about what you mean.
Right, and then but if I was talking about address, I'd be like 5,300 Highway 72.
Yeah, I feel like it's a more casual thing. Like, I don't know. If you were doing a math problem, I'd probably say 5,300. I don't know why that is, but there is a difference there for some reason. There.
Let us know, guys, in the comments, is there any difference in what you're talking about in terms of how you would say or use, for example, 5,300 versus 5,300? Would you ever use 5,300? But at the beginning, she said for 1,600, said most Brits would be fine with that or understand that.
So is it addresses? Like if someone has an address, would you say it that way?
Yeah, I'm really curious about that.
But I was definitely going against the tide of people that I lived around.
Nevertheless, I find it easy to say 50. When I'm thinking of numbers, when I want to say how much something cost.
You deal with $100 bills in America. Like, it's not rare to come across $100 bills, whereas I don't think there are, now I'm not 100% sure, but I don't think that there are 100-pound notes that are actually produced. I think it stops at 50.
What?
And I have
Really?
only incredibly rarely in my life ever seen someone actually use a 50-pound note.
Wow.
And it's always remarkable. Like at a bank, I'll see someone pull out a 50. So maybe that's why, as an American,
I think $50 notes are very rare here compared to 100.
I
bills,
feel
right?
like
I have $1,200 bills, so that's 1,200. I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but that might be why British people are not as comfortable with that kind of phrase.
Would Brits go $1,200 or pounds?
2001 for in American speech
The year?
generally. But in British speech, that sounds weird. That sounds American. You'd say 2001. So
2001.
2001.
I feel like we're taught in school actually to not put the "and" in there.
I don't remember.
At least when I was in school, you weren't supposed to say "and" because it's just an extra thing,
Trying to shorten it.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
2001, 2002.
I don't know. It's been so long. I can see it go both ways.
I feel like the American way to speak is usually to shorten things.
Yeah, very straightforward.
Casual, like.
Yeah, I believe so.
Whereas, I mean, obviously it's going to depend on where you grew up, but I feel like overall, British speaking, like the way Brits speak is generally more formal overall.
Formal. I don't know.
Well,
I don't know if I would describe it as formal.
But it just seems like the wording is more overall. You know what I mean? Like usually it's more complex.
I think it does seem to be a little bit more complex in some regards. Now, obviously, it depends on where you're from and your accent, your dialect, and whatnot. It's going to change things, but overall, probably.
This is one of those cases where, having lived in London for 10 years, and in particular having taught in front of classes and being very used to speaking to British people all the time, I can sometimes kind of forget these little phrases and which way have I always said it, and just naturally thinking about it, the 2001 or 2001, which way
2001.
would I have
I would
said
go 2001.
When I was in New York?
That's
I'm
true.
not 100% sure.
That's
I
very
think
true.
I would have said 2001.
I hadn't even thought about it.
But it's one of those things that gets kind of lost when you move from one country to another. Sometimes those little things can just kind of, you just become uncertain about how it was, and then you feel like a crazy person, right? You feel like I should know how.
Who am I?
But you just lose it. But I did look up after you mentioned the 2001. I wanted to see how Arthur C. Clarke actually says that number.
Of course, 2001.
He is British, and he says in
2001.
2001. As the title for his book is the way he always phrased it. I tried to find some audio of Stanley Kubrick saying the title of the movie, but he's an incredibly secretive kind of guy and didn't do very many interviews about it, and so I was unable to find any clip of Stanley Kubrick actually speaking aloud the name
That's
of
true.
perhaps his most
The
famous
movie 2001,
Space
Odyssey.
Odyssey.
Yeah.
Out seconds, which people sometimes need to do. A typical way of doing this is to have a word that you put in between your numbers to make it long enough that you've got a full second between the two numbers. And the typical way to do this in American English, or a typical way to do it, is to use the word Mississippi. So 1 Mississippi, 2
Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. That's
1
true.
Mississippi, 5 Mississippi.
I've heard 1,000.
That's another one.
1,000,
Yeah, that's another one.
3, 1,000.
Very true.
But yeah, I've heard Mississippi when I was younger.
6 Mississippi.
Hopefully it's about a second. I've never actually tested it.
Yeah, I
I
have
have
neither.
no idea where it comes from, except that it's a
little
fun
longer of a
word
word.
to say, and it's long. So that seems like an obvious choice to go in the middle.
Another way to do it is 1 1,000, 2
Yeah,
1,000, which you'll notice has a different number of syllables. The 1 1,000, 2 1,000, I think is found in both America and Britain. But then in Britain you've got other ones like 1 Piccadilly, 2 Piccadilly.
1 Piccadilly, 2 Piccadilly.
Or 1 elephant, 2 elephant.
1 elephant,
3
2
elephant.
I was trying to think about this, and I don't think I've ever had the opportunity to hear any of my students count in this kind of way that you would do, where you're intentionally doing seconds. So I don't know what any of them would have said, but you asking me about this is basically the first time I've ever heard about Piccadilly or elephant.
When I said 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, that's how I learned it, with that very specific sing-song kind of rhythm to help you count out the seconds. And because I've only done this on the blog, I've not actually heard people say 1 Piccadilly, 2 Piccadilly. I'm not quite
It does
sure
have a
how they-
similar cadence.
It does.
Piccadilly, I think, is okay.
Mississippi,
It has that same
Piccadilly.
kind of rhythm as Mississippi, right? So 1 Mississippi, 2 Piccadilly, 3 elephant.
Yeah, elephant
Yeah.
kind of
Elephant
random.
does not
Piccadilly
work.
seems to
I
be
don't think that works at all. I mean,
the better one, I
1
think.
elephant, 2 elephant. It's so clunky. It's no good at all. I have to veto that one. But Piccadilly
Piccadilly's nice. I like that one.
seems incredibly
Yeah.
similar to Mississippi, so I'm perfectly happy with that as a difference.
But it's also the kind of thing that I've found people have family versions of that aren't used anywhere outside their extended family. So there's room for lots of variation.
We want to hear what word you put in between numbers when you count to make sure there's a second spacing. So put comments under the video. Mississippi, elephant, Piccadilly, 1,000, something different. We want to know.
People often ask me or express astonishment when they get American addresses that they need to send something to, and the address might be 4 or 5 digit long, the number before the street. So, to live at 2,787 Main Street or something like that. Whereas,
I wouldn't say-
the last place.
Oh, I want to.
As an address,
I
that
know we're-
cringes me out. I
Okay.
would not say 2000.
All right. At the same time, at count of 3, say exactly what you would say for the number part. Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1. 2787.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same.
I lived here was number 7, and my mother.
Number
always
7?
found it strange. She often wrote it as 70. She just couldn't
number
Oh my
imagine
goodness.
that I really lived at a place that was only number 7 in the great scheme of things.
It's funny because I never really tuned into the low house numbers thing. I mean, now that you have mentioned it, it seems incredibly obvious. And yes, I can think of a bunch of addresses in my life here that were low numbers. And it's definitely the case, well, at least it's the case in New York growing up, that I don't think there was ever a house number that was less than 100. So I knew people who lived in 100 or 107 or 109 houses.
Yeah.
But I don't think there was ever a single address that was below that number.
Well,
Hold on, I have to think for a second.
I can't. Any address I've ever had has always been at least 3 digits.
Yeah, I've never.
I don't think I've ever had one that's 5. It's usually 3 or 4.
I think 3 or 4 is the average. I think 4 is
I
probably.
hate when it has 5. I don't like it. It's harder to
so
remember.
many. Yeah, they do. I've seen with 6.
Really?
Yeah, it's pretty rare to see 6. I think, at least from parts I've been at. But 5 is pretty normal. But 3 and 4 would be the most normal. But 2, I've never seen 1.
But I have noticed from the packages you guys have sent,
That's
the
true.
addresses are much smaller usually.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is, we haven't really looked into it to understand. It's something we need to actually look into soon, the difference between the zip codes. But supposedly, and I had to get used to actually marking out zip codes on package opening videos.
Postal codes.
Yeah, postal codes. Because, like, I didn't know it at first, but your postal codes literally somehow, like,
narrow down, like, really specifically
to a very, very small area.
Yeah.
And here that is
it's
quite
usually
different.
a whole city here,
Right.
so
Right.
or town.
So definitely something I had to get used to. Which I think that's going to be fascinating to look into that. So we need to do that soon.
I'm from, you never have a single digit. You rarely have a 2-digit street address. So my family is on the first block of Miller Street, and the first number is 100. Well, it's about the grid road system in America. In England, you don't talk about blocks the same way you do in America, because the roads are all higgledy-piggledy.
They were made so much longer ago.
Don't necessarily make nice squares. But since American ones typically do make nice squares, what you want in this system is to have the numbers all match.
Okay, that is interesting too. I've never looked into that, guys. If you have any ideas of what we should search for, any kind of recommendations about this, I think this would be fascinating to see kind of how streets are laid out.
The difference in the structure
in the UK.
of the grid.
Yeah, like,
well, it would be a grid. I
now,
guess.
obviously, not everywhere in America has like perfect grid blocks or whatever. There's plenty of different differences in terms of how an area is laid out. But it is true that you will definitely see quite a few. Even in our area, they crisscross a lot, even where we live. You know what I mean? So I think there is, based off what she's saying, there's probably some big differences between that. And it makes sense because, so many of your streets,
much older.
Yeah, they're so much older, and so they were built at a time where it wasn't as.
They probably weren't planning for big growth. Or
Right, they were just planning how do we get from point A to point B,
Yeah.
and then they built these roads and they built houses and villages along sides of them and whatever. I think that'd be interesting, guys. So if you have any recommendations, please let me know in the comments.
Within each block. You talk about the 100 block of Miller Street. Once you cross the road that intersects with Miller Street and go on to the next block, it'll be the 200 block. So my block of my street where I grew up goes up to 131, and then it starts over at 200 once you cross the road.
Yeah, that is really
Numbers get
confusing.
higher, quicker.
Yeah.
It is almost unbelievable to me that the numbers on one side of the street don't have anything to do with the numbers on the other side.
Wait.
And I still come across this, and it's just appalling, right?
What?
You're walking across the street, and the numbers on one side are going, 3, 5, 7, 9, and you look across the other side of the street, and the numbers will be 50, 48, 46, right? They're even, they're not aligned, and they're going in the opposite direction.
What?
And it's just maddening. I don't understand how this came to be.
Yeah, what
why
is the
anybody
logic
has let
there?
it stand for as long as it has. It is just baffling to
That's
me.
kind of surprising to me.
Wait, he's talking about the UK, obviously, right?
Yes.
Because here, it's like one side of the street are odd numbers, one side's even numbers. So
And they're the same block.
and they're the same block. So it's very easy if you're looking for a house and you're like, you know it's an even number. All you got to do is start looking at the houses, which side's got the even numbers. Okay, I know it's going to be on this side.
In town, now I will say, like, rural addresses.
It's still odds and evens.
There's still odds and evens, but it's not quite as logical as it is.
Yes, it is.
It follows a number order
Yes.
and sequence, but I'm saying how they're decided, I have no clue because they're so, like, they vary so much.
Well, when you get out into the rural areas, you're not going to have the 100 block, 200 block
Right.
thing quite. It's not going to be quite the same. But what it is, you're still, depending on what side of the road you're on, it's either going to be odds or evens, and it is going to be going up.
Yeah.
And between roads, you're going to have certain blocks. So it might be 1,100, and then you might have the 1,200 block, the next block up, which the blocks are way different. They're way larger or whatnot. But yeah, this is interesting.
Yeah,
this is the type of thing I really want to explore more, guys. Let us know in the comments if you have any suggestions for how to learn not only the way just all of this, how the addresses are set up and whatnot. I think this would be really fascinating.
And the first few times that I ran across this, that I didn't realize, like, you have to check the numbers on the
How
other
do the
side of the street.
postal
I got
workers
severely lost
understand
in
this?
a couple of times
Yeah,
trying to
that'd
find
be
places
hard.
because I'm walking down very long streets in the completely opposite direction, thinking, oh, I'll just cross the street when I need those even numbers,
Oh,
right? And then you get to wherever you're
gosh.
supposed to be, you cross the street, and you're hundreds off from wherever.
That's good
you
to
were
know
actually
before
trying to
we
get,
come
but
over.
you're
That's
still on
very
the
good
same
to know.
street. It's, like I said, it's just unbelievable to me. It's like I refuse to believe that humans ever decided to do this, right, on purpose. This isn't exactly number related, but I can tell you the thing that I did notice that I find is just charming is the habit of naming buildings houses, right? So even like a giant office building will sometimes have the name, and it'll be like 70 Darwin House. But this house suffix or this house label for like big corporate buildings
What?
or just council flats, I find is kind of remarkable and very charming in and of itself. And that strikes me as being very British.
Yeah,
Where
that's
someone
cute.
could say,
That's interesting.
Oh, I live at 50 Feynman House, but 50 Feynman House is a gigantic tower. Right? It's not like a little cottage like it sounds. So I do quite like that. I love to explore the city and just kind of wander around, and there's always a ton of construction going on. And in particular, in the past few years and right now, there's a bunch of big luxury buildings going up or that have been recently constructed. And I can't help but notice that all of them want to be number one, whatever they are, right? So, for example, there's one London Bridge, and there's one
I get that.
Blackfriars,
Sounds
one Tower Bridge.
the best.
And these
Yeah.
are luxury buildings. And they always write it like really big on the sign.
One.
They'll say one Blackfriars. And the other thing that I can't help but notice is they always like to write out the one, right? It's O-N-E.
Yeah, it would look awkward if it's
never
just
the
the
number
number.
one. I find that interesting. I assume that somewhere some architecture firm decided that this is a kind of luxury
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
statement. I'd be curious to know if this happens elsewhere in the world because, as we discussed, I don't think that it can happen in New York because the buildings can't start at 1, right? They have to start at 100. But I've noticed that some of these buildings that label themselves as 1 whatever, they're in like suspicious spots where I look around and I think, I'm not sure that you can really claim that you are 1 Tower Bridge. Right? There are numerous buildings here, any of which looks like they could be number 1 Tower Bridge. So I have my doubts about the accuracy of this number system. Although, with the street numbers, who knows, right? Numbers don't have anything to do with anything, so they could just be all over the place.
This was interesting.
That is interesting.
It just goes to show you it is much more than just our differences in the way we measure things.
Things that I wouldn't ever even think
No.
about or dream of.
Just the way it makes sense that we have different ways of pronouncing words. It totally makes sense that we would also have different ways to say numbers.
Yeah.
But I had never really thought about that being a thing.
I think the one that really surprises me the most would be the fact that the addresses don't go in a particular order.
That is
both sides of the street.
That is very interesting, and without being there, actually experiencing it, it seems confusing.
I mean, he's coming from a London perspective. Maybe not all of the UK is like that, but apparently in London it is.
So we know that you might not have, at least from what it seems, you might not have quite the order that we're used to in terms of addresses.
Which, I mean, this might be totally unrelated, but knowing that English, the original English, I will say, is a very high context language versus our low context version of English, the addresses also are very high context.
It's very true.
So, I don't know. I don't know if it's related or if it's just a coincidence, but
I do think, like he was talking about, I do find that fun. It's quirky as fun to name big office buildings and whatnot blank house.
Yeah.
I think that's
it would be totally
cool.
Unexpected. I'm with him, like if someone said, I live at blank Fineham House or Feynman House, I'd be thinking, like a quaint little cottage or a little house, and then I show up and it's a skyscraper. It would be funny.
You know, I'd say altogether that I think I agree with the way you guys pronounce numbers, especially what he was talking about toward the beginning, the double zero, double eight. I really like that. I'm going to actually start using that.
I hope you also say 888.
Yeah, I do too, because otherwise it's like,
why double?
Why not? If you don't do 888, quadruple eight, I don't know what you start doing if you get more than that.
Although quadruple, some people would be very confused by that because they don't know what quadruple is. So
who doesn't know what quadruple means?
Because it's confusing once you get past 4, 5, 6.
I'd say
a lot of the general population could get confused.
Yeah, I guess so. I think once you get to 5 or more, that would be like, okay, what exactly would you be saying when it comes to the numbers? If you know, guys, and if you actually use this, let us know in the comments. Triple, quadruple. What would you actually say after that? I have no idea. What would it be? Would
it quintuple?
Yeah, I mean, would that make sense though? Would that make sense?
Not really. I feel like that's more
a quintuple 8.
Quintuple 8. That doesn't roll off.
Yeah, that does not roll.
Triple.
But the good thing is, there's probably very rare a time that you actually have 5 8s or 5 of the same number in a row. Usually it'd be 4 or less.
Probably not a very big problem.
Yeah, but guys, let us know in the comments if what was said here is accurate from your experience in the UK. Is this the way you guys generally do numbers? Are the addresses and whatnot kind of not always as understood to an outsider coming in?
Yeah.
I feel like if you come to the U.S. and you were looking for a house street, in most areas you would, once you got down there, you would quickly understand where it was at.
There's some exceptions.
Of course.
Sometimes a street will end and then continue a block over.
Yeah,
and,
there might be something. There might be something in the way.
Right.
But maybe a river they never put a bridge over or something. But
usually it's pretty evident where you're supposed to go or be.
And so I'm curious, is it throughout the UK entirely that what he was describing here, that the addresses don't seem to be as easy to quite understand where they're at, or were they overcomplicating it? Maybe it is actually easy or something. I don't know. Or I think actually I'd love to, like I said, look into addresses in general. So if you have any recommendations for that.
Postal codes, all that.
I think address and postal codes would go together.
Yeah,
that's kind of the same thing in a way. So guys, anyways, thank you so much for stopping by. Please click that like button. Feel free to drop your comments or suggestions about this video or others. And don't forget to subscribe to continue to follow us on our journey. Until next time, guys. Peace.
Bye.